Okay, so for today, we're going to be looking on exercise 2. Now, exercise 2 represents one of the basic challenges that we usually have in this field when we have a hand drawing, and what we need to do is use Photoshop to create a more elegant replication of that hand drawing, right? So this is essentially what we're going to do today. Now, the first thing we want to do is to grab the exercise files. So if we click that link, the exercise files should be here. You're going to download it, and that is what the file should look like. Now, this represents a scan of a hand sketch that was done, and you can see that it's a pretty straightforward scan. Nothing special about it, as this could be considered one of those, we would refer to them as chicken scratch sketches that you would do with a concept. If you're trying to come up with an idea for something, maybe you grab a piece of paper, do a quick sketch, and then you might have to photocopy that to keep a record of it, or scan it to keep a record of it. So you can even see that this was done on the back of a paper, very randomly done. It's not exactly straight, and you can see that it was really just a quick sketch. Now, you might come across a scenario where you might need to enhance this image, maybe for further use or presentation. So that's what we're going to focus on today. All right, so first thing we're going to do is fire up Photoshop. Now, we did create our own workspace layout, so I'm going to load the DDM workspace. There we go. It was a much cleaner setup. And then I'm going to grab my drawing. So for me, that would be in my downloads folder. So I'm going to go to my downloads folder here, and then I'm going to grab the sketch and just drag it into Photoshop. Now, notice when I drag the sketch in Photoshop, it opens as its own file, as you can see here. That's the name of the file, as you can see there. But I am not recommending that we open a drawing this way. Instead, what I want us to do, let's close that out. What I want us to do is to create a new sheet. We're gonna say this sheet is gonna be our scanned enhanced sketch. And we're going to choose a document type to be US paper, and we'll leave everything else at default pretty much. We're going to choose OK. Now that we have a blank page, now I want you to drag in your scanned image. Now notice when we do things this way, it comes in as a smart object, and we need to click that, we need to commit that change, as you can see there. So we're going to say yes for that. Okay, now once the sketch is in, notice that it also comes on its own layer. You can see the layer here. You know it's a smart object because it has the little icon right here. And if you remember, with a smart object, we are not really able to manipulate it as freely. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to convert this. We're going to rasterize this, so we're going to choose rasterize layer, and that will allow us to now manipulate this layer. Now notice that we have another layer here, which is the background layer. And if we turn off this background layer, you can see the checkered patterns, which is here and here, which represents the transparency behind our scanned sketch layer, which is here. So therefore, if I should highlight this layer and go to my move tool, which is here, and I move this layer around, you can see that I'm moving this on top of the transparent layer. I can also resize it, and some of you might need to hold shift to resize it equally. All right, so what we're going to do now is I'm going to resize it just a tad, like that. So it's basically sitting inside my page, and essentially what I want to do is get rid of this white area that is here. So we only want to focus in on this area. So what we're going to do is, with the scan sketch layer highlighted, we're going to use a new way of cutting out the tool. Now, last week we used the polygonal lasso tool to cut custom shapes. This time we're going to use the one that's a square. So we're going to click that, and notice what I'm going to do is highlight just the usable section of the drawing. Now, I could have used my polygonal lasso tool to draw a polygon around this drawing, but let's try a different tool this time. Now, when we highlight this area of the box, what I want us to do, ensure that you have your scanned sketch layer on, and then we're going to copy. And what's going to happen is that Photoshop is going to copy everything inside the marching ants that you see. So then we're going to go to edit and choose paste. You can even use Ctrl V if you please. Now notice a new layer is pasted, and just to see what this new layer is, let me turn off my scanned sketch layer. So you can see that it pasted what we copied inside the selection box. Now, this is essentially what we need, because we've basically copied out the usable section of the sketch from the scanned sketch layer. So we're going to turn that off, and we can now continue using this layer. So I'm going to double click this, and I'm going to call it extracted sketch. Right? It's always a good idea to name your layers. All right, so now that is done, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the move tool. Remember, that's right there. And then we're going to resize this to take up most of the page. So remember, we're not going to skew it, so ensure that you're not squashing or stretching the image. Depending on the version of Photoshop, you might need to hold shift. The newer versions, you don't need to hold shift. It will automatically scale proportion for you. So we're going to scale this up so that it is roughly in the center of our screen, and we're going to click OK there. All right, great. Now we can even turn on back our background just to kind of get the sense of everything. And this is what we should have thus far. Now, we don't need the original scanned sketch layer anymore, because we've basically cut that out and we don't need that anymore. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag it down to the garbage bin here, and that will essentially get rid of that layer. So now we only have 2 layers remaining. Now with the extracted sketch layer selected, what we want to do is now identify some problems with this before we start to enhance the line work. Now the first and most obvious problem is that this sketch is lean, and that is a regular side effect that you might get from sketching, right? So what we're going to do is try to align this sketch. Now in order to do that, we're going to use the guides feature, and guides is a feature that you pretty much find in all of the Adobe digital design products, as well as most graphic design programs. Now in order to get that, what we need to do is we need to click and hold anywhere inside the ruler section. Notice there's a ruler at the top, and notice there's also a ruler on the sides. So what we need to do is grab inside the ruler and drag downwards. So let's try that. Grab inside the ruler, drag downwards, and what will happen? A guide will be created. So we're going to create a guide here to help us to align the roof. Then we're going to do the same thing from the left side. We're going to grab inside the ruler and drag out like that. So we're going to grab here and drag, and we're going to use this to align the wall. Now obviously you can see that the wall is very lean, so we need to straighten that. Let's grab another one from the top to maybe align the floor, and let's get another one down on the ground. Let's get another one for this wall over here. Now guides do not show when you are producing your work. So when you're printing, saving as a JPEG, these guides will not show up. You can control your guides by going to the view menu, and you can see where you can lock the guides, you can clear the guides and create a new guide and so forth. Alright, and you can move them around even after you have placed them. So hence when you lock the guide, you won't be able to move it, and that might be usable in some instances. Alright, so the first thing we need to do to straighten this drawing is that we're going to use the skew tool. So we're going to go to edit, transform, and we're going to go to distort actually. Now with distort selected, I want us to drag the corners, and what you want to do is to use your guides as a guide and see if you can align. You're basically watching these guidelines here, and you're trying to align your wall to these guides. At the same time, you're trying to align the roof and the floor. There you go. So we're going to move this around, and I think that's about it. And we're going to move this around. There we go. Let's carry this up a bit and over. So this is a real awesome tool, especially for architectural purposes. You might have a photo of a building that you want to align. This is how you would do it. Alright, once that's done, you're going to choose OK. And there we go, we have this building nicely aligned. Now we can just go to view and clear our guides here. Alright, and let's get rid of these arrows. Alright, so it's almost as if this was our original sketch. Now we want to start enhancing these line work here, but before we can do that, we are going to need to clean up some of these areas that we have here in the background. Now it does matter what you do first. You could try to clean this up first, or you can try to enhance the line work and then clean it up. So in this particular case, you would want to enhance the line work because that will help with the cleanup process. Because these are a bit pale, so it's a bit hard to see where the cleanup is needed. So in order to enhance the line work so that the sketch has more punch to the line work, we're going to use a filter to do that. Now your filter menu is located up here, and when you go to filters, we are going to go to the sketch filter. Now you might notice that for you the sketch filter is not showing, and that's just a reason. Photoshop actually has by default for the newer versions hid this this filter. So in order to unlock it, we're going to go to edit, and then we're going to go to preferences, and we're going to go to plugins. So again, we're going to go to edit, preferences, and plugins. So this is essentially editing the setup for Photoshop. If you want to change the color, the background, the color of the page, the units, you would do it inside of this preferences dialog box here. Alright, so we are, however, looking under the plugin section, and what you want to do is look for this option that says show all filter groups and names. So you want to make sure that that is checked. Alright, and we're going to choose OK, and let's clear that. Now that will give you the sketch filter, and what we're going to go is go to photocopy. That's what we're going to use. That's the filter that we're going to use. Now filters, think of filters as special effects that you can add to your artwork. This special effect lets the picture look like a photocopy. Now when you click it initially, you might not see it in this window, and that's because you need to adjust the scale of your preview to see what the effect looks like. So I'm going to choose the minus button, and there we go. Now I'm not seeing anything here, and the reason I'm not seeing anything is because I'm actually adding a filter to my background layer, and of course you can see that there is actually nothing on my background layer. So that is actually an error, so you're going to have to watch out for that. So I'm going to cancel this, and I'm going to now make sure that I click the extracted sketch layer. Then you also want to make sure that this here is set up correctly, and this box needs to be black and this background box needs to be white. Now these are the colors that drive the effect that you're going to do, right? And you can manually set these to default, or what you can do is just click this little button right here, and that will just reset this to default. So you want to ensure that your foreground color is black and your background color is white. Alright, so now that that is all set, then what we need to do is to go back to filter, and we're going to go to sketch, and we're going to choose photocopy. Alright, so now you will start to see some effects here, and we're going to zoom out. Alright, so right away you can see what the photocopy filter does. I mean, it actually looks like a photocopy, and you can now see more clearly the background that is here. So that poses a bit of a challenge because, you know, we don't want the background to be here on the image. Now, additionally, what you can do is tweak these values here to get the desired effect, right? So let's see. Notice that when I change the detail, carry it all the way down, notice it gets more pale. You lose the background, but you also lose some foreground. So what you're going to do is just tweak these values until you have the best mix. You have a nice bright line work, but hopefully you don't have too much of a bright background. Now there's no real escape from this, so we're going to have to clean up the background anyway. So what you want to look for is to make sure that your line work is nice and bright. All right, and if you compare that to our original image, you can see that the original image was much paler, right? So we want to try to beef up those lines. The side effect is that we're going to have to deal with these background issues, but let's take it one step at a time. All right, so we're going to now choose OK once we're happy with this. Now this is a destructive effect, meaning just like the warp tool, once you choose OK, you can't go back to edit it. You basically just have to undo. So you want to make sure that you have the right balance. You're going to choose OK. All right, so now that we have the line work nice and strong, we now need to get rid of most of these background text.
The time is 1 a.m.
And the way that you do that is we're going to need to use the eraser tool. Now there are a couple ways we can do it. So first, let's try using the eraser tool here. Now if we grab the eraser tool, and as usual, you want to make sure that this is black and white, right? If it is not, you want to hit this button to reset it. Every tool is basically driven by these options, so you want to make sure this is on the default. Now I can start erasing, and if you remember how this works, any tool you select here, the options for it are located here. So with my eraser tool, I'm able to choose the size of my brush, which is here. I can also choose how hard my brush is. You can see these values here. And I can also choose the size of the brush. That's here. Now, if this size is fine to you, then you can clean it up. But you know, you can go through and clean up. You might realize that this might be taking a little longer than necessary. So you might want to increase the size of your brush. Let's go a little bigger. There we go. Now, you want to remember you're going to use the Alt and mouse wheel to kind of move around. Now, you don't want to erase your actual line work. If you do, then you're going to go to the history. You should still have your history panel, and you can just undo the last thing you did. So what we're going to do is clean up. Now what I suggest is that you use the big brush to get rid of the far reaching elements. So you know, we're going to get rid of here and maybe some spots in here where you don't really require detail. Maybe get rid of some stuff down here. There we go. Now additionally, to get rid of these detail areas, there are two options you can pick. You can either use a smaller brush and a sharper brush. So now you would adjust the hardness. You would adjust the hardness of the brush here and make it 100% hard. And oops, there we go. And that will help you to get in these small areas. Now the reason it's still fading is because I have my flow set to 35, so I want to make sure that this is 100, and that will give me a 100% erase. I can go in, oops, undo, and I can erase these areas. Now for some of us this might be a bit of a task. Oops. So you can use the shortcut buttons to make your brush smaller, which is the left square bracket and right square bracket to enlarge. So left square bracket to get smaller. Now, in my opinion, to do most of these cleanups, you would use a combination of the brush, and I would also use my polygonal lasso tool as well. Now, how does that work? Well, we would do the same thing that we did to cut out the sky, but in this case, we're just trying to cut out, you know, all these unwanted elements. So I'm actually drawing a shape around them. Come back to the end, and I'm going to hit delete. So you might find that that is actually quicker if you are a fan of using the polygonal lasso tool. Delete. Delete. Now you can also use the freehand tool, lasso tool, if you are good with the mouse. That might be quicker for you. Delete. Or you can stick with your eraser tool. It's really up to you what you want to use. All right. Now, an interesting thing to note is, notice that we are actually on the extracted sketch layer, and we're actually deleting elements of that layer. So if you turn off your background layer, then what you will notice are these holes in your drawing. Naturally, because you have really been erasing this top layer here. So your background layer is white. So now that your background layer is turned off, you're going to see the transparent checker boxes below. So some of you might prefer this way of erasing because you can see definitely that, let's make this bigger. You can see definitely that the layer on top is erased properly, because the white is gone along with the text. Now when you're zoomed out, notice that you can't pan, and that's because you are already seeing everything. So if you zoom in, then you'll be able to pan. Now, you don't want to get rid of the lines. So to get in here now, you could either use a smaller brush, or you could use the polygonal lasso tool. So it's up to you how you want to tackle it. I'm resizing the brush using the left and right square bracket keys. And I'm gonna just switch to my polygonal lasso tool here, so that I can just make one big select of this area here. There we go. I'm going to hit delete. All right. Now let's just clean up this area here. I'm going to grab my eraser tool again and erase that. In here. Now you don't need to get rid of all of the white, because remember that the white is basically the white of the page. You're really just trying to get rid of those photocopy backgrounds that you see there. So like most of this stuff in here you could keep if you wanted to, because most of in here it's just pretty much white. All right. Oops, there's a little piece right here. Now remember, you're using a raster program, so what you're really doing is manipulating squares. If you zoom all the way in, you will see that all of these line sketches are converted to pixels. All right, so that means you have a finite. That means if you're looking at the image this close, it's going to look blurry, but this far it's going to look fine. All right, so that's just something to keep in mind. All right, so if you want, you can turn on your background layer. You know, it's going to look much cleaner now. Here, to get rid of some spots in here. Now you want to make sure that you are on the correct layer when you're erasing. So you want to highlight your extracted sketch layer and not your background layer naturally. Alright, so don't try to get it too perfect, because remember it is indeed a sketch, so we want to keep that natural, organic feel. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to enhance some of these lines, and to do that we are going to use the line tool. Now this is another tool that we're going to be introduced to. That's the tool here, and remember, anytime you select a tool here, well, you need to look at the options up top to see what the tool has to offer. So we're going to select this line tool here, and we're going to change it to line. Ensure that you're on line. Now important, we need this to not be a shape, we need it to be pixels. Now depending on your version of Photoshop, you might get an icon instead of a text, but if you hover over the icon or the button, you will see which one is pixels. So you're going to choose pixels for this one. Now once you choose pixels, then next we need to worry about the size of the pixels, which now is 4 pixels. PX means pixel. So we could test that out. If we draw a line here, well, that's the thickness of 4 pixels, and it is 4 pixels because if you zoom in, you will see it's actually, you know, 1, 2, 3, it's like 4 pixels wide, literally. All right, so we're going to undo that, and the reason we're doing this now is that we're going to enhance the sketch a bit. So now you want to do this carefully, because you don't want to turn the drawing into a, you know, a very digital AutoCAD hard drawing. You still want to keep these nice splotchy freehand gestures, but what you're really doing is just trying to enhance the line work manually. Just touch it up a bit, especially where there are these gaps. So like here, you know, you want to kind of close up some of these gaps. For example, like sketching this fascia board here, I want to close that up, and where it has the drain, that's it. Now as I said, it doesn't need to be neat, it just needs to help bolster the existing sketch in a way that is not really noticeable. There you go. So you just want to add some, you're basically trying to get some definition out. So like maybe I'd add some to these, you know, just to give these floorboards some definition. Yeah, maybe give that, there we go, that sole plate, that's that definition here. If you want, you can even put in the timber symbol for your sole plate. It is a sketch, so it may not necessarily need to have all of those things. Now in some cases you might want to go more than 4 pixels. a shortcut instead of typing is that you can just put the mouse in there and mouse wheel up or down to change the size. So I'm using 9 pixels now, and I'm just using this to give the floor some definition here, since you want the floor to be nice and thick. And for our ground, I'm going to beef that up again, and this is just so that we can give the ground plane a nice definition. Maybe like that. There we go. All right. You can use this to even enhance, so maybe I want to enhance. Actually, perhaps I would enhance these. But these lines are almost too straight, so you don't want to make them too straight. They're almost too straight. So of course, these elements are being cut through. That's why they have thicker lines, right? So you remember in your architectural drafting skills, you would want to keep the lines that are cut through much thicker, right? Just kind of enhancing that a bit. All right, let's carry the line weight down again, and yeah, I think let's get one in here, and let me just get one in the middle of here. Let's get another one here. Oh, this looks like it should come all the way down. Yeah. All right, great. So we've pretty much enhanced this. Now would be a good time to save, and we're going to save this as enhanced sketch PSD. I'm going to save it to my desktop. All right. So now that we have that done, the next step will be to add some color to our drawing. Now, some of us might be familiar with the age-old way of using the paint bucket. So for example, you might want to pick a color. So let's say that you go to your color here. You can pick a color, any color. When you pick a color, notice that your foreground color changes there. And if you want to do it old school style, you could get your paint bucket here and then try to paint. Now you might realize that that's not quite going to work out how you want it to. I mean, it is kind of working, but we're not going to invest in this method to paint. A, it's longer, and B, if you decide that you want to change the color of this, it's going to be problematic. So we're going to go to our history. So that was a little example of what we don't want to do. We want to use more modern techniques to paint rather than using the paint bucket. So what we're going to do is, well, first we're going to reset our thing here by clicking the little button here. All right, so click that button and it will reset to black and white. Now what we want to do is we want to set this up in such a way that if we change the color, we can recolor it easily. That's the objective. Now, in order to do that, I want us to turn off our background layer. Now, when you turn off the background layer, you realize that you still have these white areas that is in the drawing. Now, in order to do this feature, what we want to do is we want to get rid of all of these white areas completely. Now we don't want to have to go in and actually manually erase the white areas, definitely, because that wouldn't be too efficient. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use a feature which is housed in the magic wand. So this is yet another tool that we're going to now use. And some of us might be familiar with the magic wand, but we're going to use the magic wand in a new way. So we're going to click the magic wand icon. And what the magic wand does is try to highlight similar pixels together. So if we click here, notice that it will try to highlight all of these areas. Or if we click here, it will try to highlight within this area here. If we click inside here, it does the same thing. It tries to highlight wherever you have selected. Now, what we want to do, we don't want to do that. Instead, what we want to do, we want to right click. I want to choose this option. Sorry, we're going to make sure we're on the magic wand. We're going to right click. And when we right click, we should get a menu looking like this. Now you want to make sure that you haven't accidentally selected something with the magic wand, or else your menu would look very different. So in order to make sure we don't make this mistake, I want us to right click and say deselect. So that will ensure that we are not currently selecting anything. Then we're going to right click anywhere in the drawing and we're going to choose color range. So again, magic wand, make sure that we don't have anything selected. Make sure that you're on the extracted sketch layer. We're going to right click and choose color range. Now what color range does is it allows us to pick a color. So notice that you can kind of see the cursor is now the eyedropper. And what we're going to do is pick white. And what this is going to do is to highlight everything in our entire drawing that has the color that we just picked. And we're going to choose OK. Now notice what happens. Photoshop is automatically going in to select every color that we have that is white, even inside all of these little tiny areas, which is pretty great. So what we're going to do now is press delete. And notice what you have now. Now you have gotten rid of all the white. So all you're left with is the drawing. Now before we continue, I would like to highlight that a lot of times you might have drawings or images and you need to get rid of a background or a white background. Well, the way that we just looked on is a great way to do that, especially for sketches. But this only worked well because we originally enhanced the line work. When we enhanced the line work, it helped Photoshop to identify where the boundaries are. Alright, so now that we have that done, I want to just highlight something to you at this point. Now let's imagine that we save this file here, and I'm going to go to save as. Now I'm not going to save it as a PSD file. Instead, I'm going to save it as a PNG. And this is where we get into file types. And a PNG file is a file type that allows you to store an alpha channel, meaning, in layman's term, it will save transparency. So we're going to choose that, and we're going to leave the options at default and choose save. Now I want you to notice something great about this feature, the ability to quickly remove the background. If I open any application, I can now view, there we go, and I'll just go to my desktop. I now have a sketch that has no background, and there's a lot that you can do with this sketch. Anyway, so moving forward, what we want to do now is we want to now color inside of these spaces. Now we're going to use another approach to color inside the spaces that makes it very efficient. Now what we're going to do is let's turn on back our background layer so that it looks nice and clean. We're going to create a new layer, and to create a new layer you're going to click the new layer icon, which is located here. So we're going to choose new layer, and you can see our new layer is now there. Now we're going to double click on the text of the new layer, double click the text, and we're going to call this wood color. And how this is going to work is, let us ensure that we have the swatches panel up. So the swatches panel gives us some default colors that is just great to work with. So ensure that you have the swatches panel enabled. Now what we're going to do, ensure that you are on the wood layer, and we're going to go for the polygonal lasso tool again, right? And we're going to choose the polygonal lasso tool, and what we're going to do, we're going to start with the rafter here. So what we're going to do is color inside of this rafter. Now instead of using the paint bucket, we're going to use the polygonal lasso tool and just draw a line inside the black areas. Now here's an interesting point. You want to try and be as untidy as possible, meaning don't try to zoom in and get all this. No, you want to be very untidy, even at times missing out certain areas. And the reason you want to do that is that, remember that this is a sketch. So we're going to double click to close that. So notice we have this area selected now. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put the wood, let's get this area here. Right, so we're going to put the wood layer, and we're going to put that below our sketch layer. So let's do that. There we go. And then we are going to grab our paint bucket again, but make sure that you are on the wood color. And then we're going to choose a color, but instead of using the color panel, this time let's use the swatches panel that has some nice textured wood available to us already. So we're going to pick one of these nice colors here, and with the paint bucket highlighted, we're going to fill this area here. So notice it has just filled in the area that we have selected, which is great. Now let's go back to our layers, and what we're going to do, we're going to deselect. So we're going to change to the lasso tool again, the polygonal lasso tool, and we're going to right click and choose deselect. So now it's deselected. Now let's do the same again for here. So we're gonna, let's use the same wood layer here, and we're going to use the polygonal lasso tool, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to try to draw the highlighting here, and we're going to try to be intentionally untidy, not too untidy though. And we're also going to fill that with wood. So go back to your lasso tool and deselect. So you get the idea. So let's do this again. We're going to try a different color of wood here for our beam. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to double click, and we're going to call this wood 2. And we're going to make sure that it's also below our sketch layer. Now with the wood 2 layer selected, we're going to go back to our polygonal lasso tool, and we're going to, let's color this area here. I'm going to select that, double click to close it, and let's go over to swatches and pick another tone, maybe a darker tone, and go now to our paint bucket, and we're going to fill that with a darker tone. There we go. Maybe that's too dark, too dark, so I'm going to fill it with another tone. Yeah, that's good. Alright, so switch to polygonal tool and deselect. Alright, so let's continue. Let's fill in this stud here. We're going to make this gray because this is a black wall. So again, we're going to create a new layer. And we're going to call this wall. I'm going to move a little bit fast now because we should be getting used to this. We're going to choose a color. So we're going to go with gray. Let's see what's in here. Nope. Grayscale, let's go with that. Now you want to make sure that you are on the wall layer and that you have now on the polygonal lasso tool, and we are going to just draw in here and we're going to fill it with gray. Now if this was on top of the sketch layer, that's how it would look. So you want to make sure that it's below the sketch layer to get that effect. Now let's say you wanted to color the floorboards in the same color as this secondary wood here. Well, you could do that easily. Best to go back to the wood tool layer, or you could even make a wood floor layer and change that color. But in case you don't remember what tone of brown you used, you can always use the eyedropper tool. The eyedropper tool is located here. And you can use the eyedropper tool to get a color that's existing here. So let's try that out. So let's say we want to color the floorboards here, but we want to use back that color here. Well, all we have to do is make sure that we're on the right layer. So we're going to put that on wood tool as well. Then we're going to use the polygonal lasso tool, and we're going to highlight. I'm just going to highlight all these boards all at once. So now that's highlighted. Instead of going to swatches now, I'm going to use my pipette tool, and I'm going to click this color here, and notice that it has grabbed the color and put it there. So now I can use my paint bucket and I can fill this, and it fills with that color. Alright, so we get the basic idea. So now what we want to do is to just color the rest of the building, and you can use any color you prefer. Alright, so I'm gonna have another one here, and I'm gonna probably call this metal. I'm gonna choose another grayscale for it, maybe something lighter. Use my polygonal lasso tool, and I'm gonna select the downpipe, and I'm actually trying to be messy here. Don't want this to look too neat because it is a sketch. And I'm going to use my fill bucket, and I'm going to fill that with gray. Great. I'm going to deselect. To deselect, you have to be on your polygonal lasso tool. Alright, then we have this stud right here, so we're going to make that another brown, maybe more like a gray brown maybe. So let me choose the color first, and then I'm going to maybe create a new layer. Call it stud. And while I'm on that layer, I'm going to use the polygonal lasso tool. And how I'm going to do this, I'm going to stop here. Now I want to show you something interesting here. Notice because I have a window here, I'm going to stop here. But I don't want to have to like do this process twice. So instead, what I'm going to do now, notice that if I hold the shift button, there's actually a little plus that shows up on the cursor every time I hold the shift button. See, I've pressed it, release, I've pressed it, release. And what that does is that will allow us to add another selection. So let's do that now. So I've now added the base of this here. So now I have this and this selected. So while I'm on the stud layer, and this is the color that I chose, I can fill that and both layers will fill because I've selected both items. Alright, so I'm going to deselect again. Alright, now let's deal with this now. So I'm going to maybe work with the wood tool layer, and I'm going to select there, and I'm also going to select there. So I have two selections there. I'm going to use my eyedropper tool and grab this color and use my paint bucket tool to dump that color in this selection. There we go. Now next, if of course you can use any color you want. So because this is blue, let's use a blue color here. Now I'm going to try something new. So let me go here and I'm going to say glass. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select inside here, make sure that I'm on the glass layer, and this time I'm going to go to swatches and let's pick a nice blue color, use my paint bucket and fill. There we go. And let me deselect. Okay, so another thing that we can do is we want to fill in here with a color, but so far we have just been filling with a flat color on these areas here. So what I want us to try out is to try to fill with a gradient, because a gradient can show depth and it will give a bit more depth to our drawing. So what I want us to do, I want us to fill inside here with a nice gradient color. So to do that, we're going to create a new layer and let's call this interior. There we go. Now on this layer, we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to select inside using the polygonal lasso tool. So it's the very same concept. However, instead of filling with a color, this time we're going to fill with a gradient. Now our gradient tool is also located here, but the gradient tool is actually hidden as a secondary option to the fill tool here. So if you remember, these little teeny icons there represent that they are secondary buttons here. So if I hold this down, you will notice that now I have my gradient tool, which is a secondary tool to my fill tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold this down and choose gradient. Alright, so notice now that this is now the gradient tool. Now how the gradient tool works, it's quite interesting. These two colors here, the gradient will fade from this color to that color. And how it works is the first place you click will have this color. The next place you click will have the white color. Now let's give it a test. We can always undo. So with the gradient tool selected, we're gonna select the gradient tool, make sure that we're on the interior layer, and we're gonna click and drag and release. Now what you notice happen? Well, this blue color is up here and this white color is here. But because I dragged in this direction, it fades from blue to white. So that is actually pretty cool. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to go to my history panel and undo that. And let's do it again. So this time let's fade from top to bottom. So from top to bottom. Same thing. Okay, let's undo that again. What if I did just a short line? Well, it will only fade in a very short space. Let me undo. Let me do a long fade. And it's going to fade in a long space. So what we're going to do is actually set these colors to look a bit interesting. So first, we're going to set the foreground color. So what we're going to do, we're going to use the swatches, and let's use 2 tones. So let's try like a maybe a very light brown. No, we've been using browns. Let's try like a orange going to yellow. So we're going to click on the secondary color now. Oops. Right, we're gonna swap these colors around by using that little icon there, and we're gonna choose this yellow color. So notice we're going from yellow to a kind of brown, and let's see how that looks. It's not too bad. Maybe it's a bit bright, so maybe we should try going from like a gray, or maybe like a gray white to brown. It's not too bad either. Now you could also go to a custom color, so I could double click this and go even lighter, like down there. Yeah, that's looking better. All right, as a matter of fact, perhaps what I want to do is, because there's light here, I want to like draw a line from here so that it kind of fades. So here looks a bit lighter than down here. Let's double click this. Let's make this like basically white. So it's almost like light is coming through this window. So that is pretty cool. All right, so notice now that we have all of our areas on different layers. We can turn them on or off. And the great news about this is that if we wanted to change a particular layer, let's say like the metal layer here, well, there are 2 ways we could do that. The shortest way is that we could just click metal. We could right click and choose blending options. And while we're in blending options, we can actually do a color overlay. So we need to click it. And when we do a color overlay, basically whatever color is here, whatever color is here will also go here, because that area here is this layer here. So that is actually pretty cool. So we can simply just click this and just change the color, and whatever color we pick, it will recolor this layer. And that is because we set up these layers to work efficiently. So imagine that this was a sketch that you did, and you know, you are really, if you look back where we're coming from, we're really coming from this sketch here. And we have turned that into this. So you can already see all the enhancements that we did. We cleaned it up, we colored it, and it's even efficiently colored, so we can edit the shape whenever we want and still keep that sketchy look. Alright, so pretty much what we're missing now is maybe some entourage. And I wanted to show you a quick tip for getting entourage. You can really, as long as the file that you're downloading is a PNG file, you can get the entourage in. So if you wanted to let's use Chrome, and let's say we wanted to get a silhouette of a person there. Well, what we could do is we could just search for human silhouette and look for images. Now here is the interesting part. If you're using Google, what you can do is go to Tools, Color, and then choose Transparent. And when you choose Transparent, it will only give you results that have no white background. So for example, you can just pick this and you pretty much get this without a background. So you could just copy this image, go into Photoshop and paste it. Actually, you would need to save it in some circumstances. So I would save this image and I would save it as a PNG. It's a PNG by default. Let's save it to the desktop. And actually, we can just drag it from Chrome here onto here. There we go. And we can just make this smaller. Right. And that's how we have some entourage. So even if the entourage was not a part of the original drawing, now you have a sketch with an entourage that you can use, and you could add anything, trees and clouds and pretty much anything. But this would read now as a kind of painting, and it really came from a chicken scratch sketch that you might have done, and you can enhance it to let it look like a more presentable sketch. So that's our tutorial for today.